Before we get into working with data, let me tell you a bit about an alternative way to style your React components without using a global CSS style sheet. Let me actually scratch the global CSS sheet and lose all the styling for what we have so far. Now, with this alternative way to style React components, you don't really need to have a class name in here. So you can actually get rid of all these class names if you want to. Instead, you pass a style property. Now, this is a special React property. It is not like the HTML style property that's usually frowned upon. Just like events, instead of passing a string, we pass this special React property a JavaScript object. So we use curly braces for a dynamic value, and then we use another set of curly braces to start an object literal. This is not a special double curly brace syntax. This is just an object literal inside the normal JSX dynamic expression syntax that we do with curly braces. Inside the style object, we can specify any styles we want this element to have using the JavaScript API for styles. For example, if I want to give this GitHub profile card some margin, I can use margin and put the value in here in a string. So this would be 1 rem, for example. Similarly, here is an example style to give the info class a display of inline block and a margin left of 10 pixels. Let's also give the name here a bigger font size and test all that. Note the syntax here. It's all JavaScript. It's camel case for property names and it's strings for values. It is not the same as what you use in regular CSS. Now, there is a lot of debate around this method. It feels like using inline styles, and some people call it that, but it's quite different. The difference being, this is JavaScript, not strings. We can generate it and reuse it, and we have the complete power of JavaScript to do that. We can use conditional styles here without having to deal with conditional class names, which is usually a better deal. But this method also has its disadvantages. I often use a mix of JavaScript styles and global styles in my projects. JavaScript styles are excellent for conditional styling. Instead of using different class names based on a certain condition, with JavaScript styles, you can just output different objects, which I think it's a bit cleaner. Here is a non-related example about that specific use case. This component will output its text in either green or red colors randomly about half the time. The logic for that is right here in the component. I like that. This is easier to work with than conditionally using a class name and then go track what that class name is doing in the global CSS style sheet. I'm pretty sure we're going to need to use this in some styles in the upcoming examples, so keep this in mind. The styling methods we talked about here are really the most basic ones. They sure have a lot of limits and challenges. To mention one example, it would be a big challenge to implement media queries with JavaScript style objects. The good news is there are a lot more solutions that offer more powerful ways. You can see a good list of the available options in this GitHub repository here. Some of these options are deprecated, so don't let this long list scare you. You can find the popular options here judging by the number of stars, but you should really take a look at CSS modules, which has a few options here, but this Babel plugin CSS in JS one is probably a good starting point. There's also React Native for web, which would make sense if you're planning to use React Native as well.